At my wedding dinner, my cousin said she married for money. So I handed her the prenup signed in her name. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and golden, with autumn leaves dancing outside the cathedral windows like confetti celebrating before the ceremony even began. I remember standing in the bridal suite, surrounded by my bridesmaids, watching sunlight filter through the stained glass and cast rainbow patterns across my dress. Everything felt surreal, like I was living inside a dream I'd been too afraid to have. Sarah, my maid of honor and best friend since college, was adjusting my veil for the 100th time, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I can't believe this day is finally here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "After everything you've been through, after all the doubts and the whispers, you're getting your fairy tale ending." I caught her eye in the mirror, remembering all the nights she'd held me while I cried, all the times she'd reminded me that real love existed when I'd almost given up believing. "It's not an ending," I said softly, touching the pearl necklace my grandmother had worn at her own wedding 60 years ago. "It's a beginning." The ceremony itself was everything I dreamed it would be. Walking down that aisle on my father's arm, seeing Daniel waiting for me at the altar with tears streaming down his face, feeling the weight of our love story settling around us like a warm embrace. It was perfect. More than perfect. It was ours. When Daniel and I exchanged vows, the words we'd written ourselves, I felt the truth of our love radiating through every syllable. "I promise to love you not for what you have but for who you are," he said, his voice steady despite his tears. "To stand beside you when the world tries to tear us down, to believe in us even when others doubt." Those words would prove more prophetic than either of us realized. The reception venue looked like something from a magazine. String lights twinkling overhead, flowers cascading from every surface, tables set with my grandmother's china that had been carefully stored for decades waiting for this moment. Daniel and I had spent months planning every detail, wanting our celebration to reflect not just our love, but the community of people who had supported us through our journey together. To understand what happened next, you need to know about my cousin Rebecca. We'd grown up together, practically sisters for the first 10 years of our lives. Our mothers were twins, and we lived just 3 houses apart in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. Rebecca was always the prettier one, the more popular one, the one everyone assumed would marry well and live happily ever after. But life had other plans. While I focused on my education, earning scholarships and working multiple jobs to put myself through business school, Rebecca chose a different path. She married young to a man her parents approved of, someone with family money and the right connections. It seemed perfect from the outside, but behind closed doors, Rebecca's marriage was crumbling under the weight of expectations and incompatibility. When Rebecca's divorce was finalized 3 years ago, something changed in her. The bitterness that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over, and somehow I became the target. Maybe it was because I represented the path she hadn't taken, or maybe she genuinely believed that happiness like mine couldn't be real without a catch. The whispers had started almost immediately after Daniel and I got engaged. "She's marrying him for his money," Rebecca would say to anyone who would listen. "I mean, look at where she comes from. Look at what he can offer her. It's obvious." Never mind that I'd built my own successful consulting firm, that I owned my own home, that I'd never asked Daniel for anything beyond his love and partnership. Daniel came from old money, the kind of family where wealth was so established it barely got mentioned anymore. His great-grandfather had built a shipping empire. His grandfather had diversified into real estate and banking, and the family fortune had grown steadily through careful management and strategic investments. But Daniel himself had chosen to teach high school history, a decision that had disappointed his parents but filled me with admiration for his integrity. When we met at a charity fundraiser 2 years ago, I had no idea about his family's wealth. He was wearing a slightly wrinkled button-down shirt and jeans, talking passionately about the importance of arts funding in schools. He made me laugh until my sides hurt, then walked me to my car in the rain without an umbrella, getting completely soaked while making sure I stayed dry. It was only on our 5th date, when he casually mentioned having dinner at the family house, and I saw the sprawling estate, that I realized exactly who I was falling in love with. By then, it was too late to care about anything but the way he made me feel, seen, valued, cherished for exactly who I was. Daniel never tried to impress me with expensive gifts or fancy restaurants. Instead, he brought me books he thought I'd love, took me on hiking trails he'd discovered, cooked elaborate meals in his small apartment kitchen while telling me stories about his students. He loved me for my ambition, my independence, my fierce loyalty to the people I cared about. And I loved him for his kindness, his passion for teaching, his ability to find wonder in everyday moments. When we got engaged, Daniel's parents insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Not because they didn't like me. They'd grown genuinely fond of me over the months I'd been part of their family, but because it was simply what people in their position did. It's not personal, Daniel's mother, Eleanor, had explained over tea in her sun-drenched conservatory. It's just good business. You understand, dear. I did understand, even if it stung a little. I'd built my own business from nothing, and I knew the importance of protecting assets and planning for every contingency. The prenup was fair, generous even. It ensured that what I'd brought into the marriage would remain mine, and what Daniel's family had built over generations would stay within their family. Everything we built together would be ours equally. When it came time to sign the documents, we needed witnesses. Sarah was going to be one, but she came down with the flu the day we'd scheduled the appointment. "Don't worry," Rebecca had said when I called her in desperation. "I'll come with you. It's family after all." I remember how carefully she read every page, how she asked detailed questions about the terms and conditions. At the time, I thought she was just being thorough, looking out for my interests. Now I realize she was memorizing every detail, storing up ammunition for later use. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as I was signing my name. "It just seems so calculated, so unromantic." "Love and legal protection aren't mutually exclusive," I replied, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. She signed as my witness with a flourish, then tucked a copy of the agreement into her purse for safekeeping. The reception started flawlessly. Daniel and I had our first dance to At Last by Etta James, swaying together while our friends and family watched with tear-filled eyes. My father gave a beautiful speech about watching me grow from a determined little girl into the strong woman I'd become. Daniel's best man, his brother Michael, told embarrassing stories about Daniel's teenage years that had everyone laughing until their sides hurt. The food was incredible. We'd chosen a local caterer who specialized in farm-to-table cuisine, and every dish was a perfect reflection of the season and the region. Guests mingled between courses, sharing stories and creating new memories. Children from both families ran around the dance floor, their laughter mixing with the gentle jazz music we'd selected. I felt like I was floating through the evening, stopping to chat with aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in years, dancing with my grandfather who insisted he could still cut a rug despite being 87, posing for pictures that would become treasured family heirlooms. Daniel barely left my side, his hand always finding mine, his eyes always seeking me out across the room. "You're glowing," my grandmother said when I stopped by her table during the salad course. She was 93 and sharp as ever, her eyes twinkling with mischief. I looked exactly the same way on my wedding day. That's how I know this is the real thing. As the evening progressed, more toasts were given. My college roommate talked about how Daniel had made me laugh more in 2 years than she'd seen in the previous decade. Daniel's sister shared how he'd talked about me non-stop from the moment we met, driving the entire family crazy with his lovesick rambling. Each speech felt like a gift, another confirmation that our love story had touched the people around us. And then it was Rebecca's turn. I hadn't planned for Rebecca to give a speech. The speaking schedule had been carefully orchestrated, with only close family and wedding party members invited to share their thoughts. But during a lull in the program, as people were finishing their main course and preparing for dessert, Rebecca stood up at her table near the back of the room. She tapped her champagne glass with a fork, the crystal ringing out clearly in the sudden quiet. All eyes turned to her, and I felt a flutter of unease in my stomach. Something about her posture, about the set of her shoulders, warned me that this wasn't going to be the loving family tribute I expected. "I hope you don't mind if I say a few words," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I've known my cousin since we were babies, and I just couldn't let this evening pass without sharing some thoughts about her special day." Daniel's hand found mine under the table, his fingers interlacing with mine in a gesture that had become second nature over our 2 years together. I squeezed back, trying to calm the sudden racing of my heart. Rebecca lifted her champagne glass, and I noticed her hand was perfectly steady. This wasn't a spontaneous, emotional moment. This was planned, calculated, deliberate. "To my dear cousin," she continued, and I could hear the false sweetness in her voice even if others couldn't, "who always knew exactly what she wanted and never let anything stand in her way of getting it." A few people chuckled, thinking this was building to a compliment about my determination and drive. I held my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Some people marry for love," Rebecca said, her eyes finding mine across the room. "Some people marry for companionship. Some marry for family, for security, for a shared vision of the future." She paused dramatically, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "But my cousin, well, she married for money." The words landed like physical blows. I felt the air leave my lungs, felt the world tilt sideways around me. For a moment, I couldn't process what had just happened. This was my wedding day, my celebration, my moment of pure joy, and my own cousin had just tried to destroy it with a single vicious sentence. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the soft jazz music still playing, could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then the whispers started, a low buzz of shocked conversation that spread through the room like wildfire. I saw my mother's face go pale, saw my father half rise from his chair as if he wanted to intervene but didn't know how. I saw Daniel's parents exchange a look of pure horror, saw his grandmother clutch her pearls as if she'd just witnessed a car accident. But worst of all, I saw the faces of people I didn't know well, family, friends, distant relatives, colleagues, and I could read the speculation in their expressions. The questions that were already forming, the doubts that Rebecca had just planted about the authenticity of my love, my marriage, my character. Rebecca remained standing, her glass still raised, waiting for others to join her toast. A few people lifted their glasses uncertainly, not sure what else to do in the awkward silence that had fallen over the room. She had a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth, as if she'd just accomplished exactly what she set out to do. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened, and when I looked at him, I saw a flash of pure fury cross his face before he controlled it. He started to stand, started to speak, but I placed my other hand on his arm to stop him. This wasn't his fight. This was mine. I thought about all the times throughout my life when people had made assumptions about me, had tried to reduce me to their small understanding of who they thought I should be. Growing up in a working-class family, being the first to go to college, building my business from nothing. At every step, someone had tried to tell me I didn't belong, that I was reaching above my station, that success like mine must have come at a cost to my integrity. I thought about the night Daniel and I talked about the prenup, how he'd apologized for even having to ask, how he'd assured me that it changed nothing about his love for me or his commitment to our partnership. I thought about all the times he'd supported my business, celebrated my successes, encouraged me to dream bigger and reach higher. I thought about the life we were building together, based on mutual respect, shared values, and a love so real it took my breath away. And I realized that Rebecca's words, cruel as they were, had given me an unexpected gift, the chance to set the record straight once and for all. My clutch was sitting on the table next to my plate, a small beaded purse that had belonged to my great-grandmother. I reached for it with steady hands, surprised by my own calm in the face of such a devastating attack. Inside, along with my lipstick and tissues, was a folded piece of paper I'd been carrying since our engagement, a copy of our prenuptial agreement. I hadn't planned to bring it tonight. It wasn't something I'd expected to need at my wedding reception. But Daniel's lawyer had given us each a copy after the signing, and I'd tucked mine into my purse and forgotten about it until this moment. Standing up slowly, I felt every eye in the room follow my movement. The whispers died away completely, leaving only the soft background music and the sound of my heels clicking against the hardwood floor as I walked toward Rebecca's table. She watched me approach with a mixture of confusion and defiance, clearly not expecting me to confront her directly. The people at her table, distant cousins and family friends, looked uncomfortable, unsure whether they should intervene or pretend not to notice the drama unfolding in front of them. When I reached her table, I carefully unfolded the prenuptial agreement and placed it in front of her, smoothing out the creases with gentle precision. My voice, when I spoke, was clear enough for the entire room to hear. "If you're so sure I married for money," I said, meeting her eyes directly, "maybe you should remember what you signed." I watched the confusion flicker across Rebecca's face as she looked down at the document I'd placed before her. For a moment, she didn't seem to understand what she was looking at. Then recognition dawned, and I saw her face go through a series of expressions: confusion, understanding, horror, and finally panic. She picked up the paper with trembling hands, unfolding it completely as if hoping she'd misidentified it somehow. But there it was in black and white legal text. Our prenuptial agreement, complete with all the terms and conditions she'd read so carefully that day in the lawyer's office. And there, at the bottom of the last page, were the signatures. Mine, Daniel's, and hers. Rebecca's own handwriting, her own name, marking her as an official witness to the proceedings. "Read it," I said quietly, but my voice carried clearly in the absolute silence that had fallen over the room. "Read it out loud, so everyone can understand exactly what kind of marriage this is." Rebecca's eyes scanned the document frantically, and I could see her realizing the full implications of what she'd just done. The prenup made it very clear that I would receive virtually nothing from Daniel's family fortune in the event of a divorce. Everything I'd brought into the marriage would remain mine, everything that was his would remain his, and only assets we acquired together during our marriage would be considered joint property. In other words, if I had married Daniel for his money, the prenup would have been the worst possible outcome for me. By signing it, I'd essentially guaranteed that his wealth would never be mine, no matter what happened to our marriage. Rebecca started, then stopped. She looked around the room, seeming to realize for the first time that everyone was staring at her, waiting for her response. The piece of paper shook in her hands. "Go ahead," I encouraged, my tone gentle but firm. "Tell everyone about the terms. Tell them about the clause that protects Daniel's family assets. Tell them about the section that ensures I'll never have access to the trust funds or the inheritance. Tell them about the part where I specifically waived any claim to the business interests or the real estate holdings." Each word landed like a hammer blow. I could see people throughout the room beginning to understand, beginning to realize that Rebecca's accusation didn't just lack evidence. It was actively contradicted by the very document she'd witnessed being signed. "Tell them," I continued, "about how carefully you read every single page that day. About how you asked question after question, making sure you understood exactly what I was agreeing to. Tell them how you watched me sign away any financial benefit I might have gained from this marriage." Rebecca's face had gone from pale to ashen. She set the prenup down on the table as if it were burning her fingers, but she couldn't seem to look away from it. "The truth is," I said, turning to address the room while keeping my voice calm and clear, "I insisted on this prenup. Not Daniel, not his family, me. Because I never wanted anyone to question why I married the man I love." I could hear murmurs of surprise rippling through the crowd. This wasn't the narrative anyone had expected, certainly not the one Rebecca had been trying to create. I insisted on it because I knew there would always be people who would look at our different backgrounds and assume the worst. People who couldn't imagine that a man with Daniel's advantages might choose to love me for who I am, not what I can do for him. People who couldn't believe that I might value his character, his kindness, his integrity more than anything his bank account could offer. I walked back toward the head table, but I didn't sit down. Instead, I stood behind my chair, one hand resting on Daniel's shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. "I built my own business from nothing," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I own my own home, I have my own savings, I have my own dreams and goals and ambitions. I didn't need Daniel's money then, and I don't need it now. What I needed was a partner who would support those dreams, who would challenge me to be better, who would love me through both success and failure. Daniel's hand came up to cover mine, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my skin. I could feel his love and support radiating up through that simple touch. What I found was a man who chooses to teach high school history because he believes in shaping young minds, even though he could do anything else in the world. A man who volunteers at the homeless shelter every weekend, who remembers the names of every student he's ever taught, who cried when he read the vows I wrote for him because he couldn't believe someone loved him enough to promise those things. I paused, looking around the room at faces that had shifted from shock and confusion to something softer, understanding, perhaps even admiration. The prenup protects both of us, I said. It protects his family's legacy, and it protects my independence. It ensures that when we celebrate our 50th anniversary, and we will, nobody will ever be able to say that I stayed for anything other than love. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet that had greeted Rebecca's accusation. This was thoughtful, respectful, the silence of people processing a truth they hadn't expected to hear. Then my grandfather started clapping. Slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm. His weathered hands creating a steady rhythm that others began to join. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she applauded. Daniel's parents nodded their approval, and I saw his mother dab at her eyes with her napkin. Soon the entire room was clapping, and people began to stand. It wasn't the polite applause that follows a standard wedding toast. It was something deeper, more meaningful. It was recognition, respect, and support all rolled into one overwhelming wave of sound. Rebecca remained seated, staring down at the prenup that still lay open on her table. The people around her had joined in the applause, leaving her isolated in her chair, the physical embodiment of the choice she'd made to attack rather than celebrate. When the applause finally died down, I picked up my own champagne glass and raised it high. To marriage, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. To partnership, to choosing each other every day. And to the people who love us enough to support our happiness instead of questioning it. This time, every glass in the room rose to join mine. People called out cheers. And to marriage. And to love. The energy in the room had completely shifted from the toxic moment Rebecca had created to something warm and celebratory again. As people began to drink and the normal sounds of conversation resumed, I finally sat back down next to Daniel. He immediately pulled me close, whispering in my ear, "That was the most magnificent thing I've ever seen. I've never been more proud to be your husband." As the evening continued, person after person approached our table to apologize for Rebecca's behavior and to express their admiration for how I'd handled the situation. Daniel's grandmother, who was known for her sharp tongue and even sharper judgment, took my hands in her papery ones and said, "My dear, you have more class in your little finger than some people have in their entire bodies. Welcome to the family." My own family members were mortified by Rebecca's behavior. My Aunt Susan, Rebecca's mother, came over with tears in her eyes to apologize on her daughter's behalf. "I don't know what's gotten into her," she said, wringing her hands. "The divorce has been so hard on her, but that's no excuse for what she did to you tonight." "I know she's hurting," I replied, meaning it sincerely. "Hurt people sometimes hurt people. I just wish she'd chosen to heal instead of trying to tear others down." Rebecca herself had disappeared shortly after my response, leaving the reception without saying goodbye to anyone. Part of me felt sorry for her. I knew her attack had come from a place of pain and jealousy, emotions I understood even if I couldn't excuse her actions. But mostly, I felt relief that the truth had finally been spoken, clearly and publicly, in a way that couldn't be misinterpreted or twisted. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream. Daniel and I danced a song after song, sometimes alone on the dance floor, sometimes surrounded by friends and family who joined us in celebration. We cut our cake, a 3-tier masterpiece with lemon filling and cream cheese frosting, while photographers captured every smile and laugh. During the bouquet toss, my single cousin Emma caught the flowers and blushed furiously while her boyfriend of 5 years looked on nervously. During the garter toss, Daniel's college roommate made a spectacular diving catch that had everyone cheering and laughing. As the evening wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Daniel and I found ourselves alone for a few minutes on the venue's terrace. The October air was crisp but not cold, and stars were visible despite the city lights. "Do you regret it?" Daniel asked, pulling me close against his chest. Standing up to her like that, making such a public statement. I thought about his question seriously. The confrontation with Rebecca hadn't been planned, and I'd certainly never intended to discuss our prenup at our wedding reception. But given the choice again, I knew I'd do exactly the same thing. "No," I said firmly. "I'm tired of people making assumptions about us, about our marriage, about my motivations. I'm tired of whispers and speculation and judgment. Tonight, everyone heard the truth. They know exactly who we are and why we're together. I can live with that." "I love you," Daniel said, the words soft and warm against my hair. "I love your strength, your integrity, your refusal to let anyone define you. I love that you fought for us tonight, for the truth of what we have." "I love you too," I whispered back. "And I'd fight for us again in a heartbeat." Our wedding night was spent at a historic inn about an hour outside the city, a place we'd chosen for its romantic atmosphere and its distance from all the drama and complexity of our regular lives. As we finally settled into the honeymoon suite, still in our wedding clothes but barefoot and relaxed, Daniel poured us each a glass of champagne from the bottle the inn had provided. "To surviving our first family scandal as husband and wife," he said with a rueful smile, raising his glass to mine. "To getting it over with early," I replied, clinking my glass against his. "Now everyone knows exactly where we stand." We talked long into the night about everything that had happened, processing the evening's events and their implications. Daniel was still angry about Rebecca's attack, but I found that my own anger had faded into something more like pity. She'd tried to hurt me, but in the end, she'd only revealed her own pain and bitterness. "Do you think she'll apologize?" Daniel asked as we finally prepared for bed. "Maybe eventually," I said, hanging my wedding dress carefully in the closet. "But not anytime soon. She needs to work through whatever's driving her to lash out like this before she can make amends. And if she doesn't," I shrugged, suddenly feeling the full weight of the day's emotions, "then that's her choice. I can't control her actions, only my response to them. Tonight I responded with truth and dignity. That's enough for me." The next morning brought a flood of text messages and voicemails from friends and family members who wanted to check on us and express their continued support. Social media was buzzing with photos from the wedding and comments about the most epic wedding comeback ever, though most people were respectful enough not to mention Rebecca directly. Sarah called while we were having breakfast on the inn's sunny terrace. "Girl, I am so sorry I missed that," she said without preamble. "I mean, I'm sorry it happened at all. But if it had to happen, I wish I'd been there to see you shut her down so completely." "It wasn't about shutting her down," I corrected gently. "It was about standing up for the truth." "Same difference," Sarah replied. "Either way, you were absolutely magnificent. Daniel must be walking on air." I looked across the table at my new husband, who was reading news on his phone while absently reaching over to steal pieces of fruit from my plate. He looked up and caught me watching him, then smiled the same smile that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. "He is pretty great," I agreed, making Daniel grin wider. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of our wedding reception became something of a legend in both our families. People would reference it when discussing the importance of standing up for yourself, or when talking about the difference between truth and gossip. It became a touchstone, a reminder that love backed by integrity is stronger than any attack motivated by jealousy or bitterness. Rebecca and I didn't speak for almost 6 months after the wedding. When she finally reached out, it was through a carefully worded email that fell somewhere between an explanation and an apology. She acknowledged that her behavior had been inappropriate and hurtful, though she stopped short of taking full responsibility for her actions. She mentioned her difficult divorce, her financial struggles, and her feelings of being left behind as everyone else moved forward with their lives. I understood her pain, even if I couldn't excuse her choices. I wrote back a brief response accepting her apology and wishing her well, but I didn't invite her back into my life. Some bridges, once burned, can't be completely rebuilt. Trust, once broken so publicly and deliberately, takes years to restore, if it ever can be. Daniel and I settled into married life with an ease that surprised both of us. Having weathered such a public test of our relationship so early, we found that the smaller challenges of merging two lives seemed manageable by comparison. We maintained separate bank accounts as outlined in our prenup, but we shared everything else: dreams, goals, daily responsibilities, and the small joys and frustrations that make up a real partnership. My business continued to grow, and Daniel's teaching career flourished. We bought a house together, a modest colonial in a neighborhood we both loved, purchased with money we'd saved separately but chosen together. We adopted a rescue dog, planned vacations, hosted dinner parties, and slowly built the life we'd promised each other in our vows. Looking back now, I realize that Rebecca's attack, devastating as it was in the moment, actually gave us a gift. It forced us to articulate publicly what we'd always known privately, that our marriage was built on something much deeper and more enduring than financial convenience or social climbing. The prenup, which Rebecca had tried to use as evidence of a transactional relationship, actually proved the opposite. It demonstrated that I'd been willing to forego any financial benefit from our marriage because what I wanted from Daniel couldn't be quantified in dollars or assets. I wanted his partnership, his support, his laughter, his dreams intertwined with mine. I wanted to build something together that would be ours alone, something that wouldn't exist without both of us contributing our individual strengths. Daniel often said that the way I handled that evening was when he truly understood who he'd married. Not just the woman he'd fallen in love with, but the partner who would stand beside him through whatever challenges life might bring. Someone who wouldn't be cowed by public embarrassment or family drama, who would speak truth even when it was difficult, who would defend what mattered most with grace and strength. For my part, the way Daniel supported me that night, squeezing my hand under the table, being ready to speak up for me, and then letting me handle the situation in my own way, showed me the kind of husband he would be. Present but not controlling, supportive but respectful of my independence, angry on my behalf but trusting in my ability to defend myself. 3 years have passed since our wedding day, and the story has taken on a life of its own. Friends still mention it when discussing relationship goals or when someone needs inspiration to stand up for themselves. Daniel's students occasionally hear the tale, in appropriately edited form, when he teaches units on integrity and standing up for your beliefs. Rebecca and I have achieved a cordial distance. We see each other at family gatherings and exchange polite conversation, but we're not close. She's made some positive changes in her life, started therapy, went back to school, began building a career independent of her family's expectations. I'm genuinely glad for her growth, even if our relationship will never be what it once was. The prenup remains unchanged and largely irrelevant to our daily lives. Daniel and I make decisions together about major purchases, plan our financial future as a team, and support each other's individual goals and ambitions. The legal document that was supposed to prove my mercenary motives instead serves as a reminder that true partnership transcends financial considerations. Our marriage has weathered other challenges since that dramatic wedding reception: job changes, family illnesses, the normal stresses and strains of building a life together. But we've faced each obstacle with the same commitment to truth and mutual support that we demonstrated that night. When people try to create drama or spread gossip about us, and they occasionally do, we respond with facts, dignity, and an unshakable confidence in what we've built together. If someone asked me today what I learned from that terrible, wonderful moment at our wedding reception, I would tell them this: love isn't about what you can get from someone else, it's about what you can build together. Real love doesn't need to be defended against outside attacks because it's rooted in truth that can withstand any scrutiny. The money, the prenup, the family drama, all of it was just noise around the edges of something much simpler and more profound. Daniel and I chose each other not because of what we could offer materially, but because of who we became when we were together. We made each other better, braver, more generous, more hopeful. That night at our wedding, when I stood up to defend our marriage, I wasn't really defending against accusations about money. I was defending the truth of our love story, messy and complicated and real, built on shared values and mutual respect and the simple miracle of finding someone who sees you completely and chooses you anyway. Rebecca's attack forced us to articulate that truth publicly, but it didn't create it. It had been there all along, in every conversation that lasted until dawn, every Sunday morning spent reading the newspaper together, every small kindness and daily choice to prioritize each other's happiness. It was there in Daniel's decision to teach instead of entering the family business, and in my insistence on maintaining my independence even while building our partnership. Love like that doesn't need money to sustain it, and money can't create it where it doesn't exist. It simply is, constant and renewable, growing stronger through challenges rather than weaker, proving itself not through grand gestures but through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small choices to honor and cherish each other. When I think about that evening now, I don't remember Rebecca's words with pain anymore. Instead, I remember the feeling of standing up for something precious and true, the sensation of Daniel's hand in mine providing strength and support, the sound of applause from people who recognized integrity when they saw it. Most of all, I remember the moment later that night when Daniel and I were finally alone, when he looked at me with such pride and love and said, "Now I know exactly who I married, and I've never been more certain that I chose right." That certainty, that bone-deep knowledge that we belong together regardless of what anyone else thinks or says, is worth more than any fortune could ever be. It's the real treasure we found in each other, the genuine wealth that no prenup could ever touch, and the foundation on which we've built a marriage that grows stronger with each passing day. Love isn't about money. It's about trust, resilience, and having someone who stands by you even when others try to tear you down. It's about choosing each other again and again, in public and in private, in moments of joy and in times of challenge. It's about building something together that wouldn't exist without both partners contributing their whole hearts. That's what we have. That's what we've always had. And that's what will carry us through whatever comes next. The story of our wedding reception didn't end that night. It continued to unfold in ways I never could have anticipated. Within weeks, I started receiving messages from strangers who had heard the story secondhand. Women wrote to tell me about their own experiences with family members who questioned their motives for marriage. Young professionals shared stories about being judged for their ambition or their choice in partners. One message particularly touched me. It came from a college student named Maria, whose boyfriend came from a wealthy family. She was facing constant whispers from classmates and even some family members who assumed she was a gold digger. "Your story gave me the courage to address it head-on," she wrote. "I showed my boyfriend's parents our budget spreadsheet where I pay for all my own expenses and half of our dates. The assumptions stopped pretty quickly after that." Another came from a successful businesswoman whose in-laws had never accepted her because she earned more than their son. "You reminded me that I don't need anyone's permission to be successful or to be loved," she said. "I stopped trying to make myself smaller to make them more comfortable." These messages made me realize that our story had touched on something much larger than one family's drama. It spoke to the universal experience of being judged, of having your motives questioned, of fighting to be seen for who you really are rather than what others assume about you. Daniel suggested I write about the experience, maybe turn it into a blog post or article. "People are clearly connecting with it," he said one evening as I read him another email from someone who had found strength in our story. "Maybe sharing it more widely could help even more people." I considered it but ultimately decided against it. Our story was personal, intimate, born out of a specific moment of pain and triumph. Making it public felt like it would diminish its power, turn it into content rather than truth. Instead, I chose to share it quietly, one conversation at a time, whenever someone needed to hear that standing up for yourself is always worth it. Interestingly, the wedding incident had an unexpected impact on my consulting business. Word spread through our professional network about how I'd handled the situation, and I began receiving calls from potential clients who specifically mentioned it as a reason they wanted to work with me. "If you can handle family drama with that much grace and strength," one CEO told me during our initial consultation, "I trust you can handle our organizational challenges with the same level of professionalism and integrity." My business doubled in size over the following year, not because of the story itself, but because of what it revealed about my character and approach to difficult situations. Clients appreciated working with someone who demonstrated that you could be both assertive and respectful, both strong and graceful. Daniel was incredibly proud of my success, never showing even a hint of jealousy or insecurity as my income grew to exceed his teacher's salary. He celebrated every new contract, every positive client review, every milestone in my company's growth. His support and enthusiasm reminded me daily why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. We established a tradition of celebrating business wins together, not with expensive dinners or lavish gifts, but with simple pleasures that reflected our shared values. A weekend camping trip after I landed my biggest client. A day spent volunteering at the animal shelter when I received a particularly meaningful testimonial. Small celebrations that honored success while keeping us grounded in what truly mattered. 2 years after the wedding, Rebecca reached out again, this time with a phone call rather than an email. Her voice was different. Softer, more mature, less defensive than it had been in our previous communications. "I've been in therapy," she said without preamble. "Dealing with a lot of things, including what I did at your wedding. I understand now that I was projecting my own fears and insecurities onto you and Daniel. I was angry at myself for making choices based on what other people expected, and I took that anger out on you for making different choices." It was the most honest conversation we'd had since we were children. She talked about the pressure she'd felt to marry young and marry well, how she'd ignored her own instincts about her ex-husband because he looked good on paper. She spoke about the bitterness she'd felt watching me build a successful career while she'd put her own ambitions on hold for a marriage that ultimately failed. "I was jealous," she admitted. "Not of Daniel's money, but of your courage to be yourself. You always knew what you wanted and went after it. I spent so many years trying to be what other people wanted me to be that I lost track of who I actually was." I listened without interrupting, recognizing the pain in her voice and respecting the vulnerability it took to make this call. When she finished, I shared some of my own struggles, the times I'd doubted myself, the pressure I'd felt to prove I was worthy of Daniel's love, the fear that maybe people's assumptions about me contained some grain of truth. "The difference is," I said gently, "you let other people's voices become louder than your own. I had to learn to trust my own judgment, even when everyone else disagreed." We talked for over an hour, and while it didn't immediately restore our close relationship, it opened the door to healing. We began having occasional coffee dates, carefully rebuilding trust and understanding. Rebecca started sharing details about her therapy, her return to school to finish her degree, her tentative steps toward dating again, this time guided by her own preferences rather than external expectations. Daniel began incorporating lessons from our experience into his history classes, using our story, with my permission and appropriate modifications, as an example of how individuals can stand up against unjust accusations while maintaining their dignity and integrity. "Mrs. Thompson, that's my wife," he would tell his students, faced a situation where someone tried to publicly embarrass her based on assumptions and jealousy. She could have responded with anger, or she could have stayed silent and let the accusation stand. Instead, she chose a third option. She responded with facts, calmly and clearly, and let the truth speak for itself. He used it as a jumping-off point for discussions about character, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. His students loved the story, especially the dramatic moment of the prenup revelation, but more importantly, they absorbed the deeper lessons about courage and authenticity. One of his students, a shy girl named Ashley who was being bullied by classmates who said she thought she was better than everyone because she got good grades, came to him after class one day. "I keep thinking about your wife's story," she said. "How she didn't let someone else define who she was. I think I need to do that too." Ashley went on to speak to her guidance counselor about the bullying and eventually gave a presentation to her class about the importance of academic achievement and supporting each other's success rather than tearing each other down. Daniel was incredibly proud, both of Ashley's courage and of the way our story had inspired positive action. As our marriage matured, Daniel and I discovered that the foundation we'd built, rooted in mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering support for each other's individual growth, served us well through all kinds of challenges. When Daniel's father had a heart attack, we navigated the stress and family dynamics together, with me providing practical support while he focused on emotional care. When my biggest client unexpectedly terminated their contract, Daniel was there with both comfort and practical help, spending evenings stuffing envelopes for my marketing campaign while I rebuilt my business. We learned to fight fairly, to disagree without attacking, to support each other's dreams even when they required sacrifice from both of us. When Daniel was offered a position teaching at a prestigious private school that would have doubled his salary, we spent weeks discussing whether the increased income was worth the compromise to his values about public education. Ultimately, he turned it down, and I supported his decision completely because I understood what drove his passion for teaching. When I had the opportunity to expand my business nationally, requiring significant travel and time away from home, Daniel encouraged me to pursue it even though it meant more household responsibilities would fall to him. "This is your dream," he said simply. "We'll make it work." These decisions weren't always easy, but they reinforced what we'd learned on our wedding night. When your partnership is built on genuine love and respect, you can weather any storm by facing it together. On our third wedding anniversary, Daniel and I returned to the same venue where we'd held our reception. We weren't having a party. We simply wanted to revisit the place where our marriage had been tested so early and had emerged stronger. The room looked different in the daylight, smaller and more ordinary than it had seemed on our wedding night. But as we stood where we'd sat at the head table, I could still feel the echo of that evening's emotions: the shock, the hurt, the determination, and ultimately, the triumph. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Rebecca hadn't made that toast?" Daniel asked, his arm around my waist as we looked out at the empty dance floor. I considered the question seriously. "I think we would have had to face that test eventually," I said. "Maybe not so publicly, maybe not so dramatically, but people would have kept whispering and wondering. At least this way, we got to set the record straight once and for all. No regrets." "None," I said firmly. "I'm glad it happened. I'm glad we handled it the way we did. I'm glad everyone knows exactly who we are and why we're together." That evening, we had dinner at the small restaurant where Daniel had first told me he loved me. It was a modest place, nothing fancy or expensive, but it held special meaning for us. As we shared dessert and talked about our plans for the future, I reflected on how much we'd grown both individually and as a couple. The woman who had stood up at her wedding reception to defend her marriage was still there inside me, but she was calmer now, more confident, secure in the knowledge that love based on truth doesn't need constant defending. The man who had supported me through that moment had grown too, becoming even more the partner I'd always known he could be. As word of our story continued to spread through our community, Daniel and I found ourselves in an unexpected role as mentors to other couples facing similar challenges. Friends would call when they were dealing with judgmental family members, or when someone questioned their relationship choices. We helped Sarah navigate her own family drama when her parents disapproved of her boyfriend because he didn't have a college degree, despite being a successful and kind-hearted electrician. We counseled Daniel's brother Michael when his wife's friends kept suggesting she was settling by marrying a teacher instead of pursuing wealthy men. In each case, our advice was the same: know your own truth, live authentically, and don't let other people's limitations define your possibilities. Sometimes standing up for yourself requires dramatic action, as it had for me at our wedding. Other times, it's as simple as refusing to engage with toxic conversations or setting clear boundaries about what behavior you'll accept. We also made it a point to publicly support other couples who faced similar scrutiny. When Daniel's colleague married a woman 15 years younger and people whispered about gold digging and midlife crises, we made sure to attend their wedding and celebrate their happiness openly. When my business partner married a man whose previous bankruptcy had some people questioning her judgment, we hosted an engagement party and invited everyone we knew. These actions weren't grand gestures. They were simply extensions of the same principle that had guided my response to Rebecca's attack. When you know something is true and right, you stand by it, whether it's your own relationship or someone else's. 5 years after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Daniel cried when I told him, the same tears of joy I'd seen on our wedding day. As we began preparing for our first child, we talked about the kind of family we wanted to create and the values we hoped to instill. "I want our children to know they can be anything they want to be," Daniel said one evening as we assembled a crib in what would become the nursery. I want them to understand that their worth isn't determined by what other people think or expect, but by their own character and choices. I want them to know that love is about partnership and mutual respect, I added, folding tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small. That you choose someone not for what they can give you, but for who they are and who you become together. We decided that when our children were old enough to understand, we would tell them about our wedding night. Not the dramatic details, but the essential lesson it taught about standing up for truth, defending what matters, and never letting anyone else define your story. The story would become part of our family lore, passed down as a reminder that courage comes in many forms, that dignity and grace are always choices, and that real love withstands any test because it's built on something deeper than circumstances or appearances. Our daughter, Emma Rose, was born on a sunny Tuesday in May, healthy and beautiful, and completely oblivious to the drama that had preceded her arrival into our lives. As I held her for the first time, with Daniel beside me in the hospital bed, I thought about the future we would build for her, one based on the same principles that had carried us through our early challenges. She would grow up knowing that her parents chose each other freely, completely, and without any agenda beyond love. She would see daily examples of partnership, respect, and mutual support. She would learn that standing up for yourself and others isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Today, as I write this, Emma is 2 years old, and Daniel and I are expecting our second child. Our marriage is stronger than ever, built on the foundation of that early test and strengthened by every challenge we've faced together since. Rebecca and I have found our way to a warm, if distant, friendship. She's remarried, this time to a kind, funny man she met in graduate school while pursuing a degree in social work. At her wedding, I gave a toast about second chances and the courage it takes to choose authentic happiness over social expectations. There were no dramatic revelations or family confrontations, just genuine celebration of two people who had found their way to real love. The prenup still exists, tucked away in our safe deposit box, largely irrelevant to our daily lives but standing as a testament to the choices we made early in our relationship. Sometimes I take it out and read it, remembering the woman who insisted on signing it and the reasons that drove her decision. That document, which Rebecca tried to use as evidence of my mercenary motives, instead proved the depth of my commitment to building something real with Daniel. It demonstrated that I was willing to forego any financial benefit because what I wanted from our marriage couldn't be bought or inherited. It had to be created together, day by day, choice by choice, through the accumulation of shared experiences and mutual devotion. The story of our wedding reception has become more than just a family anecdote. It's a reminder that truth has power, that dignity is always a choice, and that love rooted in authenticity can weather any storm. It's taught us that standing up for what's right isn't always comfortable or easy, but it's always worthwhile. Most importantly, it's shown us that the best marriages aren't the ones that avoid conflict, but the ones that face challenges together and emerge stronger. Every test we've passed, from that dramatic evening to the everyday struggles of building a life together, has reinforced what we learned on our wedding night. When two people are truly committed to each other and to the truth of their relationship, nothing can shake the foundation they've built. As I watch Emma play in our garden while Daniel reads lesson plans and our dog sleeps in the sunshine, I'm grateful for every moment that led us here, even the painful ones. Especially the painful ones. They taught us who we are, both individually and together, and they gave us the tools to build something lasting and true. The woman who stood up at her wedding reception to defend her marriage is still here, but she's evolved. She's calmer now, more secure, confident in the knowledge that love based on truth doesn't need constant defending. It simply needs to be lived, day after day, with integrity and joy. That's the real lesson of our story. Not that dramatic gestures are necessary or that public confrontations solve everything, but that knowing who you are and standing by your truth, quietly when possible, boldly when necessary, is the foundation of both personal happiness and lasting love. Love isn't about money, status, or meeting other people's expectations. It's about finding someone who sees you completely and chooses you anyway, then spending a lifetime honoring that choice through actions both large and small. That's what we have. That's what we've built. And that's what we'll pass on to our children. The knowledge that real love is worth fighting for, worth standing up for, and worth celebrating every single day. Our story continues to unfold, one ordinary miracle at a time, proving again and again that the best revenge against those who try to diminish your happiness is simply to live that happiness fully, authentically, and without apology. And we will. For all the days of our lives.